Chapter 16. The timing was perfect. Hollis and DeMarco reached the bottom of the stairs just as Thomas was admitting Bishop and Tony Hart. I had to come along, he said to his fellow team members, still trying to get it all worked out in my head. Join the club, Hollis said, with some feeling. But she was too professional to air her grievances in front of the stately butler, so all she added to him was, Thomas, could you please tell Anna and Owen that we'd like to speak to them before we leave? We'll wait in the parlor. Of course, miss. Tony stared after him, then raised his brows at Hollis. Seriously? Yeah, he's from another age. This way. She led them all into the grand parlor and closed the door behind them. But it was DeMarco who spoke first. Who did you tell him you were? He asked Bishop. I'm guessing the truth might spook Owen, to say the least. I spoke to Mrs. Alexander earlier this morning and told her there was a family matter I needed to discuss with her. From what you've said about Owen Alexander, I expect he'll join us out of curiosity. Probably, DeMarco agreed. Hollis was looking at her boss through narrowed eyes. I take it your morning has been busy? Bishop smiled faintly, the other side of the vortex. Damn it, he has a way of taking the wind out of my sails. She wondered how many of her fellow agents had read that thought. But her tone was milder when she said, I hope nobody was hurt. We thought we heard a gunshot just before the last door was sealed. Callie Davis was wounded, though not with a gun. She's fine, recovering in the clinic in Devil's Gap. Hollis blinked. We were that close. With the town and half a mountain between you, yes. He briefly explained that Callie had been informally teamed with the Haven operative, who had also been wounded by Cole Jacoby, and that Luther Brinkman had shot and killed Jacoby. Jacoby the bank robber? Jacoby, who was Anna's half-brother? Hollis wanted to know. Yes, but half-siblings separated by a lot of years and distance. The two families were never blended. As far as I can tell, Anna never even met Cole Jacoby when they were kids. She's probably forgotten he ever existed. If she even knew, DeMarco offered. Bishop nodded. Entirely possible, but Jacoby knew. When we look more closely at his history, we found he'd done research a couple of years ago and came here looking for Mrs. Alexander. She wasn't here, Hollis guessed. No, but he had the chance to explore the place. It was after the biggest robbery of his life that he returned here, believing this would be a safe place to stash the money. But since she again wasn't here at the time, and since Owen Alexander appears to have made some sort of deal with Jacoby, I doubt he would have told her about the visit. Tony looked at Hollis again with lifted brows. Is Alexander the kind of man who'd be willing to hide nearly $10 million in stolen currency? I wouldn't have said so, she frowned, unless he was lying to me. Unless he was lying to us. He more or less relinquished control of the family business, but stayed on the board of directors. Not really the actions of an ambitious or greedy man, right? No sign either he or his sister-in-law was in financial trouble, and no signs of criminal leanings in his background, other than one bad mistake he made as a kid and has been haunted by ever since. He appears to have walked the straight and narrow. She briefly explained about Jamie Bell. Well, if you ask me, Tony said, the only possible explanation is the door opened to admit Anna, followed closely by Owen. Under her breath, Hollis said to Tony, your timing sucks. Or not, he said. Hollis didn't get a chance to respond to that, distracted by the introductions. Anna, the perfect hostess, led the way to one of the larger seating groups in the room so everyone could sit down, though she was clearly somewhat bewildered. I'm afraid I don't understand how all of you are connected. Mr. Bishop said this was about a family matter. Distracted again, this time by the odd idea of Bishop being a Mr. rather than an agent, Hollis almost missed his response to Anna. It's Agent Bishop, Mrs. Alexander. I'm with the FBI. Owen scowled at him. ID. Bishop produced his credentials, seemingly unmoved by the way Owen very intently studied them before passing them back to him. "What does the FBI want with Anna?" he demanded of Bishop. "It was her you asked to see, wasn't it?" Pleasantly, Bishop answered, "Because this concerns her family, Mr. Alexander." "Ma'am, were you aware you had a younger half-brother?" Rather blankly, she said, "A brother? No, I had no idea. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my father was—" Bishop helped her out. "He was abusive, and your mother was granted a restraining order against him. Shortly after that, he moved to the West Coast and never contacted you or your mother again." "It was a long time ago," Anna said slowly. "He never hit me, and I think my mother recognized what he was quickly enough and was strong enough that leaving him was easy for her. She remarried. My stepfather, who legally adopted me, was always kind, and then eventually I met and married Daniel. I haven't thought of my biological father in decades. He married again." Bishop nodded. "To a woman who didn't recognize what he was quickly enough, or wasn't strong enough to leave him when she did. He abused both her and their son, though Cole Jacoby was still young when his father was killed in a bar fight." Anna blinked. "A bar fight, I see. And my brother?" "Became a petty criminal who did time in prison and eventually graduated to bank robberies," Bishop told her calmly, "which is where the FBI enters the picture. Ma'am, your half-brother was killed yesterday not very far from here, shot in self-defense by a private investigator who had tracked him up into the mountains." Anna looked completely disconcerted, which Hollis could well understand. It had to be upsetting to learn of the existence of a half-brother and be told of his life of crime and his death, all within the space of a few short moments. "He's dead?" Owen Alexander looked briefly almost as disconcerted as his sister-in-law, but then his face settled into its customary unrevealing expression. Bishop looked at him and smiled. It could be many things, that smile of his, but when he directed it at Owen, it was curiously dangerous. "He's dead, Mr. Alexander. So, of course, we've come for the money." There was a long, long silence. Hollis allowed her gaze to roam from face to face. Tony and DeMarco were watchful. Anna was still obviously bewildered. Owen's face was stone-like, and Bishop... Well, he was Bishop, giving away nothing of his thoughts or feelings. Before Owen could say anything, Bishop went on, his tone still calm, even pleasant, but with steel around the edges. "Months ago, Cole Jacoby came here looking for the half-sister his research had uncovered. It had taken him time to discover who she was and where she was, but he had time on his hands then, so he found out about her, and about the Alexander family she married into, about Alexander House, where he actually stayed for a time, just another hotel guest. But Cole Jacoby was less interested in establishing family relations than he was in finding a safe place he could turn to if he needed one. This remote place seemed an excellent potential hideaway or safe house, so he banked that information for future need. When he robbed a bank and got away with $10 million rather than the considerably smaller amounts that had kept him off the national radar, he knew law enforcement agencies and officials all up and down the eastern part of the country would search for him and search hard. He knew he'd be caught, and sooner rather than later, so he needed a place to hide the money. Owen opened his mouth, but Bishop continued in that calm, relentless voice. "I don't know what sort of deal he offered or why you accepted it, but I can make a few educated guesses. You dislike business, dislike turning your home into a hotel for half the year, but you always enjoyed the good life, so those weren't necessary evils. Then Jacoby showed up with millions he'd stolen, and he told you he'd split the money with you if only you'd keep it hidden until he returned, or until the statute of limitations was up. It seemed a good deal to you. A few years of patience, living as you always had, and then a windfall that would allow you to live as you liked, without being tied to a business or a home that was no longer really yours." "I want a lawyer," Owen said, then spoiled the very smart demand by adding impatiently, You can't prove any of that? There's no one here who will testify that anyone named Jacoby ever visited this house. In an aside to her partner, Hollis murmured, more family secrets Thomas will take to his grave? Probably, he agreed just as quietly. And, Owen added, even if you have a warrant to search the place, you aren't going to find stolen millions here. Bishop smiled again. Just because it wasn't in the original plans for the house doesn't mean we don't know about the false panel in your closet, Mr. Alexander. Hiding a space large enough to house all that cash. Owen went white. You can't... How do you... Hollis couldn't resist. That's the thing about spirits, Owen. They tend to know all our secrets, especially the dangerous ones, and the spirit of a girl you never knew in life knows all about that false panel, how to open it, and what it hides. And she was happy to share the information. Her name was Brooke, by the way. Gotcha, Tony said.